This episode is brought to you by HASA. Liquid is clearly better. Liquid chlorine is the highest purity, works immediately, has no added cyanuric acid or calcium, and it will leave your pool safe, clean, and clear. And by the bottom feeder professional grade battery powered vacuum system. It sucks to clean pools, so cleaning pools sucks less. Get $100 off with code DVB100.
This episode is brought to you by Skimmer, the #1 pool service software in North America. With Skimmer, you can streamline your schedule, grow your revenue, and keep your customers coming back with 5-star service. Whether you're a one-person operation or an established team, Skimmer is your partner in success. Visit getskimmer.com/poolguy to try Skimmer for free for 30 days.
The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show.
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I have another Best of Bob Lowry, where Bob Lowry talks about high cyanuric acid, the reasons why it's not good for water balancing, and since he's a chemistry expert, I think you should really listen carefully to why high cyanuric acid is not a good thing for your pool. Are you a pool service pro looking to take your business to the next level? Join the Pool Guy Coaching Program. Get expert advice, business tips, exclusive content, and get direct support from me. I'm a 35-year veteran in the industry. Whether you're starting out or scaling up, I've got the tools to help you succeed. Learn more at swimmingpoollearning.com. And that brings us to the subject of the CYA debate. Now, there's some that say that, well, we can first talk about what exactly is cyanuric acid. One question I get all the time is, why is it referred to as conditioner or stabilizer? Besides using the chemical name, the cyanuric acid name, why is it in the industry do we call it a conditioner or a stabilizer?
Cyanuric acid, by the way, was brought to the pool industry in 1956. And shortly thereafter, they chlorinated it and made it into a granular and then eventually compressed it into a tablet. And a tablet became a great thing. But cyanuric acid was a great thing in the beginning. They thought that the only thing that it did was it slowed down the UV or sunlight degradation of chlorine in water. And chlorine, if you just put liquid chlorine or straight chlorine into water and make the killing form of chlorine, then the degradation of that is about 75% in 2 hours. And then in the next 2 hours, it's 75% of that. So you can see that pretty much in 4 hours, the chlorine is gone. In the 1950s, if you had a pool guy that serviced your pool, he came to your pool every day because the chlorine he put in yesterday was gone. Pool guys couldn't take care of too many pools because they had to come to your pool every day. And so there wasn't a thing like a weekly call. But as soon as they developed cyanuric acid, introduced it, started selling it as a dispenser for chlorine, it took off like a jet and became the most popular chlorine in the industry, and probably still is to this day. In the beginning, it caught the rest of the chlorine manufacturers unaware. And as a result, there was all kinds of rumors going around in the 50s and 60s and continue to this day that it will lock up all of your chlorine and so that your chlorine won't work at all and you can get cancer from it. And I mean, there's just been one thing after another to try to displace it. I think the competitors started most of that. But in any case, those rumors still persist. But now that we have better technology, better understanding, and better methods of testing and things, we've been able to dig into this a little bit deeper. But the fact is that we call this product a stabilizer, a conditioner, because it stabilizes chlorine against UV degradation. And in fact, using as little as 30 parts per million of cyanuric acid in the water will keep the chlorine in the pool 8 times longer than without it. And so that is huge. If we're talking about your chlorine being gone in one day in a regular pool, and if you had cyanuric acid in the pool, it would last a week, 8 times longer. So it is a magic chemical from that standpoint. But what we overlooked, because I went back and looked at the information since about the mid 1970s, we have known that cyanuric acid and chlorine actually bond together in the pool. And there's only a very small percentage of the chlorine that is not attached to cyanuric acid. And it doesn't mean that when it's attached to it, it's not available. What it means is that the amount of chlorine that is available in the water is in an equilibrium. And even though it's a small amount, when some of that chlorine that's free gets used, some of the chlorine that's bound to cyanuric acid instantaneously converts over to the killing form of chlorine. It's like it's not all available right now, but all of the chlorine that's in your pool will be available until there's none of it left. But the percentage is very small. The percentage, even at around 30 to 50 parts per million of cyanuric acid, only 3% of the chlorine is available. 97% of the chlorine that's in the water is bound to cyanuric acid, provided you've got more than 30 parts per million of cyanuric acid in the pool. If you get up to about 100 parts per million of cyanuric acid, there's only 2% of your chlorine that's available. And God forbid that you should get up to 150 or 200 parts per million, because then there's only about 1% of your chlorine that's available.
I think that points out the next part that I was going to ask you is the cyanuric acid level is probably the number one factor on the effectiveness of chlorine in the pool. Is that correct?
That's right. The rate of killing, the speed, and the duration of killing is all controlled by the cyanuric acid. And it's a good thing, but too much of it is a bad thing. So we need some to protect chlorine from sunlight and so on, but we also need to understand that it's not just a chemical that protects chlorine from sunlight. It is a buffer, and it's actually quite a good buffer against the pH going down. So it's a good buffer in the water to keep the pH from going down. So it acts in conjunction with the alkalinity in the pool, which is also a buffer. And the total alkalinity keeps the pH from going down. And so those two are the buffer system against pH going down. We know, if you've studied a little bit, you know that there is an adjustment that needs to be made to the Langolier saturation index because of cyanuric acid. And in general terms, you take 1/3 of cyanuric acid and subtract it from the total alkalinity reading to get what we call carbonate alkalinity. And this is what we use when we calculate the saturation.
And the Pool Guy Podcast Show has teamed up with UPA to bring you affordable, reliable liability insurance starting at just $64 a month. Get up to $2 million in coverage, and the members of my coaching group get an even lower rate. Protect your business and your peace of mind. Sign up with UPA today by clicking the link in the podcast description.
Index.
I think it's important to note too then that cyanuric acid not only affects the chlorine, but again, you mentioned it's a buffer to pH. So the reason
That's
why you
right.
need to do the adjusted alkalinity, it affects more than one part of the water.
It controls the killing, it controls the pH from it going down, and it keeps chlorine from being destroyed by sunlight. So it does a number of things that we really didn't think about when they originally put it in the pool back in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that is surprising in this era is that there's really no effective way to eliminate it or reduce the level except partially or fully draining the pool. I know that there are some chemicals on the market, bioactive and natural chemistry have a cyanuric acid reducing chemical. And I know that Rudy Stankiewicz talks about using aluminum sulfate to reduce the level. But, as far as science goes and as far as the chemicals that will counter cyanuric acid, is draining the pool the only way to actually get rid of it?
It's probably the cheapest, fastest, and most effective way is just to drain some of the water and fill it back up. And because tap water doesn't have any cyanuric acid in it, we can pretty much drain whatever percentage of the pool we need to get back down to 50. So if you have 100 in your pool and you want to get to 50, you drain 50% of the water and fill it back up and you'll be at 50. So that's the most effective, but you can use alum. And what they've said is that a percentage, which is strange, but because most chemicals you add an amount and you get an expected precipitate or an expected amount that comes out of the water, and it's on a molecular basis, it's 1 for 1. So we're able to calculate that, but people are saying that, they're no matter where they're starting cyanuric acid is, they put alum in and 50% of it's gone. And I find that a strange thing as a chemist that happens. But nonetheless, it does appear to lower cyanuric acid some, but then you end up with alum and the precipitate of cyanuric acid on the bottom of the pool. And you're going to be adding something like 8 pounds for each 10,000 gallons of alum to the pool. So if you've got a 20,000 gallon pool, you're going to put in 16 pounds of alum, and then you're going to put in, it's going to precipitate another 8 pounds of cyanuric acid. And so you're going to have 24 pounds of stuff on the bottom of the pool. And it doesn't, because the alum makes what we call a flock. The flock is like a feather in air. It's the same thing. It's kind of a very light, spread out leaf looking thing that is in the bottom that takes hours to settle. You put the alum in the pool and mix it up and then let it settle for something like 12 hours. And once at the end of 12 hours in the bottom of the pool, you've got about 6 inches of stuff in the bottom of the pool. And then you need to vacuum that to waste, and you have to vacuum it very slowly because if you move the vacuum very quick, it resuspends the alum flock. And so you don't get it sucked up into the vacuum. So you have to vacuum very slowly. Well, when you vacuum very slowly, you may end up losing 800 or 1,000 gallons of water out of your pool just from vacuuming because you have to vacuum to waste. And then there's one concern that someone has raised, and I'm not one of them, but someone has said that it leaves aluminum in the pool. There is an EPA drinking water standard on the amount of aluminum in pools because they think it has something to do with Alzheimer's and dementia. Mm-hmm. So at any rate, it does. There's a potential to leave some aluminum in the pool.
I think the bottom line is that draining and refilling is probably the safest and most effective still.
So, well, you can see how much work it is to use alum. And, if you're going to drain your pool, you either set your pool equipment onto waste or, you put a pump in it and pump some of it out and you're done. You don't have to add the alum and mix it up and vacuum to waste and do all that stuff. So, and then when you're done with alum, you end up having to readjust your alkalinity and your pH because it changes it.
Yeah, and I would say, that makes it more complicated for sure. And one thing I think is pretty well known in the industry, it may not be known by everybody, but the fact that cyanuric acid does not evaporate out of the pool when you lose water. So it just stays in the pool, and that's why the level keeps increasing. And one thing that I've recently was brought to my attention, someone posted this in my group, and it was originally, I think, on the Arenda blog, and it's by Richard Falk. And the
Right.
quote goes something like this. I'll read part of it, or maybe all of it. It says, also in all pools using CYA, chlorine slowly oxidizes CYA itself. At normal warm pool temperatures, the CYA loss is around 3 parts per million per month, and it takes 2.5 parts per million free chlorine to oxidize 1 part per million of CYA. Some pools show higher loss, mostly due to high temperature and higher pH that accelerates this reaction. Based on this quote by him, is it accurate to say that the chlorine can oxidize CYA at higher temperatures?
It does, but the amount is small enough that it's probably not even something you can measure. You're looking at maybe 5 ppm a month
Hmm.
in the summer when you're using the pool and you've got a higher chlorine level.
Yeah.
And so it's really not very much at all. And especially if you're using trichlor, you're putting back more than that every week anyway.
Hmm.
You know, in a typical pool, you're probably putting 20 to 30 parts per million of cyanuric acid into the pool every month in the summer. And if the degradation is only 5, you're far behind what could do. And I looked into seeing if we could actually run the chlorine level up high enough that it would kill off the cyanuric acid level. And I went all the way up to 200 parts per million of chlorine, and it still didn't wipe out the cyanuric acid.
Huh.
So it's a pretty hardy molecule. Cyanuric acid wasn't invented in 1956. It was actually discovered in the ground in around 1900 around cattle. Cattle, when they poop on the ground, it contains some chemicals that are similar to fertilizer, and fertilizer is kind of one of the starting chemicals to make cyanuric acid. So in the stomach of a cow, they actually make cyanuric acid to a small degree. To a small degree, I'm not saying that that's where they get it, but so it's not that. But so, and that of course raises the question where somebody said it was cancer causing and caused the industry to go crazy around 1980, and they had to repeat a lot of the tests to prove to everybody that cyanuric acid was not cancer causing.
Yeah. So I think back to that quote, I think the dilution probably, from evaporation, because you do add fresh water to the pool.
Evaporation doesn't lose any cyanuric acid, but because evaporation is like distillation, only a lot slower. And so when the water evaporates, only pure water evaporates. All the calcium and sodium and everything that's in the pool stays there. And then when you add more water, that stays there again. So all the stuff in the pool keeps building up. That's why your TDS builds up and your cyanuric acid builds up, because you keep, using the cyanuric acid and adding more, and it keeps building up. The only thing that loses cyanuric acid or any other constituent that's in the pool is water loss.
Hmm.
And water loss, of course, can be from a leak or splash out or drag out or filter backwashing. But aside from that, unless there's a water loss, you're not lowering cyanuric acid.
And if you're looking for other episodes, of course, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel Monday through Friday, where I post a new episode. Also, if you go to my website, Swimming Pool Learning, and click on the podcast icon on the banner, there'll be a drop-down menu, over 1,700 podcasts there for you as well. And if you're interested in the coaching program that I offer, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week. God bless. This episode is brought to you by HASA, providing products that deliver clean, healthy water for every aspect of everyday life. The bottom feeder battery-powered vacuum system, portable, powerful, and only weighs 12 pounds. And Skimmer. Get Skimmer, America's #1 pool service software. Podcast listeners can try Skimmer for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.